Hi, everyone, and welcome to What Triggers You. I'm Stacy Pellettieri, licensed clinical social worker, trauma therapist, and your host. On this podcast, we explore trauma, triggers, and the ways our past experiences continue to shape our present. Some episodes feature anonymous guests sharing their personal stories, while others bring in experts to discuss topics that intersect with trauma, healing, relationships, mental health, and human behavior. My goal is simple: to help you better understand yourself and the people around you. So let's get started. Today, I do have a guest, an expert guest that is going to share with us, and I'm excited for that. So I'm going to just tell you a little bit about her. We have Mary Beth, who has been sober from her methamphetamine use disorder since 1994. She also is in recovery from abuse, trauma, and anxiety. She wrote about her story in her award-winning memoir, From Junkie to Judge: One Woman's Triumph Over Trauma and Addiction. I love that title. Mary Beth is a director for She Recovers Foundation and for LifeRing Secular Recovery. She also is on the advisory council for the Higher Calling Foundation. She regularly speaks on behalf of these organizations and about multiple paths to recovery. This includes television, radio, conferences, podcasts, and recovery houses. She develops relationships with other organizations such as Women for Sobriety and trains attorneys, judges, and medical professionals. Mary Beth regularly writes opinion pieces which have appeared in the Wall Street Journal, Los Angeles Times, Philadelphia Inquirer, Recovery Today, and other publications. Her memoir writings have been published in Memoir Magazine, Awakenings, and Raven's Perch, among others. Professionally, 6 years into her recovery, Mary Beth attended Berkeley Law. She worked at a large firm, then litigated class actions for the federal government. In 2014, she was appointed a federal administrative law judge, from which position she retired in early 2020. Right in time for the pandemic.
It was January 30th, like 5 weeks before the world shut down. Yes.
Oh my gosh. Lucky timing for you. My goodness. So that's quite a bio. There's a lot packed up in there. So welcome, Mary Beth O'Connor. Excited to have you here and excited to see where this conversation goes. So tell me a little bit about yourself in your own words, and what your journey has aligned with our trauma podcast here on What Triggers You.
Well, the short version that I typically use fits in exactly with your focus, which is that childhood abuse led to childhood addiction, right? And that is a very common pathway. Traumatic experiences, especially when you're young, can make drugs particularly attractive, and the odds of developing an addiction are much higher. And for me, when I got, I had a long-term addiction. I didn't get sober till 32. And when I did, I knew the trauma, and it was child physical and sexual abuse, emotional, verbal. I had multiple sexual assaults outside the home as well, a violent boyfriend at one point. I knew that trauma pain was underneath my drug use. And if I was going to stay sober, but especially if I was going to have a happy and productive life, I had to address that as well. And so when I got home from rehab, I did find a therapist with expertise in trauma. And to my surprise, she correctly diagnosed me with PTSD, which showed up as very severe anxiety. And so for me, that's all connected. And one of the things I do often talk about when I speak is the interplay of trauma, mental health disorders, as well as substance use disorder, because there's a common intertwining of those things.
Yes, there is. And this is, I love that we're having this conversation because this is so important. A lot of times what I do see in substance use disorder organizations or clinics or, recovery centers, they do focus a lot on the addiction. They focus a lot on the substance. And they don't necessarily get to the core of the trauma, which is often the predecessor to why this person landed in the addiction world in the first place. I think there's definitely something to be said about the biological rootings of addiction and that it can be something that is inherited. However, it can also be something that comes from trauma. And having this conversation is so important. So let's do that. Can you tell me a little bit more, from your experience in how trauma specifically led to substance use disorder for you?
Well, so it can go both ways. It can be that the trauma leads to the addiction, but addiction can also cause trauma, right? And I will use addiction and substance use disorder interchangeably. Substance use disorder, of course, is the medical terminology, the mental health terminology, and the diagnostic manual. But people are more familiar with addiction, so I use both. But for the precursor side of it, the trauma, then addiction, for a lot of us that had trauma in childhood, right, you're looking for a way to relieve your pain. You're looking for a way to manage the anxiety. You're looking for a way even to have fun and feel good. And drugs can offer that. I mean, the truth is that the drugs do actually work in the beginning, right? That's part of why you keep using them. The first drug I had was alcohol when I was 12. And what I really noticed was like my pain felt more distant. My stress went down. I was sort of laughing and giggling and having fun in a more joyful way than I was familiar with, and that really captured my attention. Like, this is great. I want more. And that history of trauma does increase your risk. It significantly increases it. And for me, I pursued it and used to excess right away. And then I added in other drugs, weed and pills and hallucinogens until I found my favorite drug, which was methamphetamine. But that is a very common pathway to addiction. It's something like 25% of people with mental health disorders have an addiction, but something like 55 to 75% of people with an addiction have trauma and or other untreated mental health, which is often trauma-based, like anxiety, PTSD, or depression. So they're very closely correlated.
Oh my gosh, 100%. That's what we see in our counseling centers all day long. So, you mentioned the word pain a lot. You brought that up. And so, first I want to just pause for a moment just to kind of respect and honor your journey. I really appreciate that you're sharing with us because you've been on quite a journey. And, I'm sorry that you did go through that, but I'm so happy for you that you've gotten to the other side of it and that you're using your story and your experience to kind of really spread awareness and help others. But to go back to what you were saying, I noticed that you used the word pain. I think you said it at least 3 or 4 times. And so, when we talk about trauma and we talk about triggers, pain, right? Pain can be experienced in a lot of different ways, right? And so pain that comes from trauma is actually a trigger, right? It could be a feeling in your body. It could be a felt sense. It could be a tightness in your chest. It could be a palpitating heart, right? It could be sweating. It could be a tingling skin. It could be a feeling of extreme overwhelm, a feeling of extreme fear, right? Feelings of doom. There's so many different experiences that really go into what we call pain, right? And so I'm assuming that the pain you're talking about that you were numbing with substance was emotional pain.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes. And it's interesting because it changed its nature. So when I was young and using drugs, when I was living in that violent household, I definitely had anxiety and I would, jump at loud noises. I didn't like people behind me, all those kind of things. But it really, the pain emotionally showed up more as depression. There were times where I wouldn't shower. There were times where I really didn't want to leave the house or deal with people. I felt my mood was very low and I felt very, very debilitated, very, very unable to sort of interact or engage emotionally with people at a normal level. I just felt like I was shut down and sort of in a quiet, numbed way. But when I got sober, my trauma pain showed up much more as very severe anxiety, which was interesting. And I will say, we probably should talk about that. Recovery was actually harder and longer than my sobriety recovery, but it changed its nature. When I got sober, it was really very, very severe anxiety. I would spin, I would, obsess, I would compulsively go over anything that I was triggering my fear. My husband used to call me the "what about tomorrow" girl, because even if things were going well now, to me, I was always living on the edge and always believed that one little thing was going to push me over and everything positive that I had and that I had worked for and accomplished was going to get, thrown away or stolen from me. So it was interesting how the nature of the way I experienced the pain changed over time.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And it's common. I see that a lot. It sounds like, in the beginning, right, you were hypervigilant. It sounds like before the substance use started, there was this hypervigilance that turned into numbness, right? And that
Yes.
might have been like your protective factor, right? Like being hypervigilant is overwhelming. And so sometimes this feeling of just like apathy, just like, who cares? I don't care about anything, comes in to protect you, because it's easier to sort of bring yourself into this place of I don't care than it is to wander the world worrying all the time. And if you lived or grew up in a household where there was violence and abuse and aggressive behaviors going on, and you didn't have really any control over what was going on, it is not uncommon for the coping mechanism to be just shut down and numbness, right? I can't change this. I can't do anything about what's going on around me. I have no control over others. And so all I can do to survive here is to really just be numb to it, because it's going to exist around me. So being hypervigilant to it and worrying about it and being afraid of it isn't going to get me anywhere. What's that going to do for me, right? So I go numb, and then you turn to substance, right, to kind of bring life back into your body, because the numbness became overwhelming.
It's an interesting way you describe it is accurate. In the beginning, well, when I first got exposed to my stepfather when I was 9, I mean, my mother was violent, but my stepfather was much, much worse. In the beginning, at first, I was trying to figure out what sort of the new rules were, right? Like, because, things that I had done all my life suddenly were a problem, like walking barefoot in the house. Well, okay, fine, I'll adjust. But over time, I realized, it's actually not about any of those things. It's about him, that he is going to get triggered for reasons of his own that have little to nothing to do with me. So what I do and what happens to me are not very closely connected, because his violence is about him. And so that made me realize I have very little control. I mean, I tried to develop strategies to reduce the risk. Like I taught my sister a certain way to open the door so it didn't make noise. I taught her how to put the dishes away from the dishwasher, one dish at a time, so they didn't clack. So I did what I could, but ultimately it was out of my control. At first, I went through a period then of fighting back. I would get verbally aggressive with him, but after a while, I just got worn down, and I stopped all that, and I just got, as you say, numb. In fact, when I was a teenager, there was a Pink Floyd song called "Comfortably Numb" that was out, and I used to say, I'm numb, but I haven't gotten to the comfortably part yet, So that was definitely a focus, and yes, the drugs. Not only do they help with the pain relief, but they did bring a level of happiness and joy, bonding to people, right? You're having this communal experience. You're high, you're happy, you're talking about social and political issues and friends, and you're feeling connected and bonded. And so there were a lot of positive experiences tied to the drug use in the beginning that were something I hadn't really experienced since I had numbed out so much for so long.
Yeah, it was this search for common connected, right? Which is something as humans we all want, right? Just to be in this place of like, I get to turn myself back on, right? Because the numbness, that in and of itself is so hard to bear. It's depression, right? Depression
Yes.
is painful. It is so painful. Somebody once said to me that the pain of depression is so severe that they would opt to have their arm chopped off over experiencing the pain of depression any day, right? That physical pain is just nothing next to the pain of depression. And I believe it. It can be so, so hard. It sounds like growing up, you sort of were the victim, I guess. And I hate to use the word victim, but I feel like you were at the mercy of somebody else's triggers.
Yes.
It sounds like your stepfather, he was triggered by anything and everything. It could be like your shoe in the wrong place, right? Or you're wearing a shoe in the house, whatever it was. And he got triggered by that. And so he projected whatever was being triggered for him, he projected that onto you. And like you said, you had no control over that. And so being hypervigilant around it and trying to find some secret sauce to it, right? Or some connecting dots was pointless. And that state of pointlessness, this nothing I can do to protect myself, is so hard and so painful. And so you went through this period, right, of numbing, and then you went through this period of drug use to kind of just escape the numbness. But what's really interesting is that you talk about how once you went through your sobriety and you came out the other side and you stopped using, you then had to face these emotions that you had been sort of avoiding, right? From so many years. You first avoided it through numbness, then you avoided it through substance use. And now the only really way through your healing journey is to face the feelings you had been avoiding since you were a kid, right? So
Yes.
what was
Yes.
that like?
Yes. And I will say that's part of why early recovery is so hard for so many of us, right? Is that we now, whatever we've been shoving down with the drugs now rises, and we don't have the practice, the experience, the skills to know how to deal with those emotions or to know how to handle our behaviors better. And so when I found the therapist and she told me I had PTSD, I didn't actually know you could have PTSD if you weren't a war vet. Like that was a brand new concept to me, but it made sense when she explained it. But the severity of the anxiety was a surprise to me because it was relatively new. And so my therapist did a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy with me. She did some hypnosis, but it was a really slow recovery. It took a long time for me to lose that sense of constant impending doom. I mean, my sobriety was really stable by 2.5 years. And I was in individual therapy for 3 years and then 3 years in therapy, a group therapy with other women with trauma histories, which was a whole new revelation to me. But I mean, and even then at the end of that, I would have said I was maybe 80% recovered. And today I say 95, and it's, been decades more, but it was deep. I didn't really understand all of why it was happening. And even when I saw it, I couldn't just stop it. I mean, I still would spin and spin, even when I knew it wasn't logical. But for a long time, I did believe a lot of it. I remember my therapist said, Mary Beth, you're really smart and you can explain anything, but that doesn't mean it's accurate. Like my risk assessment was disproportionate to the actual risk. And I remember I would say to her, I would say, I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm saying it could happen. And so I need to worry about it and have a plan, but you can't plan for every contingency. And that's what it felt like I had to do to feel safe. It also showed up for me in perfectionism, especially at work, overwork. I mean, there were a lot of ways this damage showed itself. I also had terrible interpersonal skills when I got sober. I could be very verbally aggressive if I felt vulnerable or I felt like you were being evasive and not taking responsibility for something I needed you to take responsibility for. It would trigger me, and I would just jump down your throat or get mean. I mean, it showed up in many, many different ways. And so it took a lot of time to sort of disentangle that and understand it and change my behavior. Understanding doesn't lead to an automatic light switch behavior change, right? I had to practice it and learn how to do it. And so it was very complicated, and it did take quite a long time.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. What you're talking about is that OCD loop, right? And that is a cycle that is so, oh my gosh, so painful. We work with so many clients with OCD, and it is very common for OCD to become triggered by trauma, right? And a lot of, there's definitely some people out in the field that might disagree, and they say that OCD is genetically based, and it can be. But absolutely, we see this spiral, this loop of I need to search for the answer. I need to know what bad I could be facing. I need to see the dangers in front of me, and I need to know what I'm going to do about it. So you're constantly rehearsing.
Yes.
Right? The conversation that didn't happen yet, that might never happen. And you're constantly rehearsing, right? Like, what is my response going to be to this? What is my reaction going to be to this? What am I going to do when this happens? What am I going to do when that happens? Right? That hypervigilance that you sort of avoided or tried to get away from when you were a kid, right? Through your numbness came back, right? It came back full circle. And because you never learned really, the ways to handle that, and you didn't learn how to address it back then, and you avoided it, right? Instead, you kind of like leaped into this avoidance loop. You're now back to that place of, okay, it's my job to keep myself safe. And I can only keep myself safe if I can control everything that's going on around me, right? And so it sounds like for you, your biggest trigger was uncertainty.
Yes, it was. vulnerability, it was conflict, uncertainty. And I will say it's interesting that you mentioned OCD, because even before we moved in with my stepfather, my mother was not bonded to me. I mean, she wasn't really focused on me. I really was well aware for as far back as I can remember that I was on my own, that she wasn't there. And I was the oldest and I had a younger sibling I felt responsible for. And I had OCD-like behaviors when I was young. I used to have counting behaviors where every time when people were talking, I would count the syllables and I needed that to end on an odd syllable. And if it didn't, I would say something to make it end on an odd syllable. For a while, when I was 9 and we first moved in with my stepfather, my mother and he had a child, so a little baby. I mean, I'm 9 and it's a baby. And I had a hairbrush set, a brush, comb, and mirror set. And I had this belief that if I didn't put them down in the right order, something horrible was going to happen to my brother. And so I did have OCD signs even before a lot of the violence. And then it just showed up in a different way, as you say, when I got sober, in that anxiety loop and that obsessive thinking. It was the spiraling in my early recovery, even when I was really making mostly right choices, making a lot of forward progress, doing the right thing, going to work and getting a better job and getting my behaviors a little bit better. And so many good, I never felt proud or couldn't see the progress, because in my mind, I was always on the cusp of danger, of everything going wrong. And so I used to, at some point, realize this, and I made myself pause at times and look backward and say, look how far you've come. Look how much better you're doing than a year ago or two, because it's not how I thought. That was something I had to sort of train myself into because of the fear, the sense of vulnerability, the sense of being on the edge of one little mistake or even just misunderstanding and everything would be taken away from me. It was a very distressing space to live in, even when on the outside my life was going so much better.
Yeah, because you know what's happening for you, and then it's oh my gosh, it's so hard. It is so hard. When you're in that, it's like your brain is scanning for danger constantly. Right? It's like, I have to know what is going to happen and I have to protect myself from it. So there could be 10 great, amazing, wonderful things right in front of you. And you will just weed right through that, right past, right through all of it, ignore all of it. It's all irrelevant. None of the good stuff matters. I need to find the one problem, right? Where's the one broken chair in the sea of 1,000 chairs? And let's worry about fixing that chair instead of saying, don't worry about the broken chair. There's 999 perfectly good chairs here, right?
Yes.
And those chairs are invisible to you. And you only see the broken chair. And so going through life, really, where that's all you're doing is scanning for danger, looking to protect yourself, right? It's self-fulfilling prophecy. We find what we look for. So if we look for a problem, we'll find a problem, even if it doesn't exist. And when our mind is overseeing the good stuff and only scanning for the bad, we basically are like giving ourselves this facade, right? This delusional landscape of everything in my life is bad. Everything in my life is dangerous, which just completes the biofeedback loop of things are bad. Things are wrong. There's always something waiting for me. There's always something looming, right? It's like you're convincing yourself that what you believe to be true about, this impending doom is real. And I have to keep searching and I have to keep scanning. And that's how I keep myself safe, right? You're convincing yourself that there's a method to this madness that there really isn't, right?
It's very true. And I will say one of the important things that my therapist taught me, and it took a long time for me to believe her, was that I needed to view it as not that I can protect myself from bad things happening, because some bad things were going to happen to me in my life, but that I had to learn to trust that I would be able to handle them. Maybe not handle them without pain. Maybe there would be struggle. Maybe it would be difficult, but I would be able to handle them. And on top of that, the number of things that were going to go wrong for me were many fewer than I was anticipating. And so, but it was really that learning that belief system that I am competent, I am capable, I can handle challenges that arise in my life, even the ones that might be unfair or might be devastating in some way, that I was going to be able to handle them. And they weren't really life-threatening the way it felt to me that they were.
Right. So that trigger, right? That feeling in your body, that felt sense telling you that this was doom and that this was the end of the world, right? Was coming from your past experiences. And it wasn't about what was happening in that present moment,
Yes.
right? So it sounds like luckily you had a good therapist. I'm so glad that you did, right? Who really understands this stuff and was able to guide you in the right way to say, like, your body is telling you that this is really dangerous, but logically it is not. Can we separate the two? Can we allow this feeling that comes over us to pass, right, without acting on it, right? And some exposure work, right, is really, I think, the most effective way through this, to sit in and tolerate the discomfort of uncertainty, to say, okay, this isn't necessarily catastrophic. My body is telling me it's catastrophic because my past is telling me that, but in the present moment, this really isn't. And so let me take a look at the beliefs that are working against me right now. And how can we shift this belief into one that's going to be, more serving for me in this moment and make more sense for me and be healthier for me, and be able to tolerate distress and sit with this discomfort until it passes and know that it does, right? So you went through a lifetime of avoiding the triggers, avoiding the pain, avoiding the discomfort. And really, in your greatest healing moments, which was the hardest moments, but the ones that really, pivoted you right towards healing and brought you into this healthy place that you're in today, were when you really did the work on sitting with and tolerating the discomfort of the triggers, dealing with the discomfort of the feelings that came up, and not acting on them, and just letting them pass, letting them be, allowing yourself to experience and regulate without needing to control.
Yes, although the process was, even when I was, understanding it more and more and more, the process was still challenging. Like for example, one thing that was really triggering for me was dealing with people where I needed something from you and you weren't either giving it to me or you were being evasive about your responsibility in the problem. And so I couldn't get you to do what I needed you to do. Like, let's say with a customer service rep on the phone who I needed something from, that could be really triggering for me. And I could get mean. I remember one time a customer service rep told me she was doing her best. And I said, that's what's so pathetic. I mean, it was really, really bad behavior that I didn't want to keep doing. But it took me a long time to get it under control because I was being triggered. And for me, the way those things usually worked is, as I understood it better and got more practice, in the beginning, I could control it when it was sort of on the more mild end of the trigger, right? But not when it was at the moderate or high end of trigger. And over time, with practice and understanding and learning how to release that fear and those emotions, I could be not triggered by increasingly stressful situations. So even if they acted at what would be a highly triggering situation for me, I was able to handle it in an appropriate way. Along that path, I wanted to handle it in a more appropriate way, but I wasn't able to. It took me a while to get to that point.
Yeah, that's the most important part, right? Is to be patient with the process and to have compassion for yourself, to have patience for yourself, to know that this is a work in progress, right? We can't rewire the nervous system overnight, right?
Yes.
Just knowing, just learning, reading a self-help book and saying, okay, I get it. This is why this is happening, right? And sometimes patients will come into treatment and they'll say, okay, great. So now I know why that happened. So now what? Right? And now what part is hard, but it is the process. And that's what you were doing. It was the process of practicing over time, sitting with the distress, not reacting, not responding, allowing the trigger to surface, noticing the presence of the trigger without reacting to the trigger, and slowly over time rewiring a nervous system that is less triggered, less hypervigilant, right? Less activated by these situations.
Yes. I remember, let's say in the middle of that process where I would have a situation with someone that was a triggering situation for me. And I could see from their face that they were still uncomfortable with my reaction. And what I wanted to yell was, but I'm so much better than I used to be. Right. But better and good aren't always the same. But, sometimes it was like, you don't understand. This is better. This is way better, but it did take a while while. And part of it is really practice. It's, we talk about neuroplasticity, right? Part of it's that rewiring of the brain through repeated experiences of doing better. That's related to sobriety as well. The more situations you handle without picking up the drink or the drug, the less likely it is you're going to do it the next time or have an impulse move. And so, but yes, it took longer than I anticipated for me to be able to get my behavior under better control. This was also a lot related to my relationship with my mother, because my mother, she was abusive as well. And she got worse when she was being abused by my stepfather. But she also, a lot of this, my reaction, my being triggered by people being evasive and not taking responsibilities related to my mother's behavior. Like my mother never owned anything, and she was slippery. She would come up with some new story, some new excuse, and just wiggle out of there, and that drove me crazy. So I had trouble dealing with it. But in my sobriety, my mother's behavior didn't change. She kept being very verbally abusive, emotionally abusive, trying to get me to do things. And I had to gradually emotionally separate. And one day she was screaming at me for something ridiculous when I was there for Christmas. And I realized I am not having any emotional reaction to this at all. And it was like, oh my gosh, like this was success to me. I didn't, because in the beginning I would behave like she was behaving. Her triggering me caused me to act like her, which I didn't really want to do. But it took a lot. So even with one of the original core sources of my behavior, of my discomfort, of, me feeling vulnerable and being triggered, even with her, I was able over time to manage it to such a way that I could not only control my behavior, but actually was able to not react emotionally anymore. And that was a beautiful day.
Oh my gosh, how powerful. Wow, right? That moment, right? Sometimes we don't see change happening when it's happening like a little bit at a time. Like I say to my patients all the time, change is kind of like a drip in a bucket. Like you have this really, really slow drip and you put a bucket there and it's like drip, drip. And you say to yourself, I'm good with this bucket. It's dripping so slow. It's never going to fill up. And you walk away. And you come back a few hours later or the next day and the bucket is full. And you can't even fathom how that tiny little drip like filled the bucket. And that's exactly what the healing journey is like, right? Like every little practice you took, sitting with discomfort without reacting, allowing yourself to be triggered and experience the trigger and feel the trigger and show yourself that you can tolerate the discomfort and you can tolerate the pain without avoiding, without numbing, without substance, right? You are rewiring the brain, right?
Yes.
That brain, that plasticity that you brought up, right? We are changing the neurotransmitters and the way that your brain is actually communicating with the different parts of the brain. You are giving a different story, right, to your mind, and you are giving a different story to your body. And eventually over time, there becomes such a big shift that you have that aha moment, right? Where your mom acts out with bad behavior in a way that would normally trigger you to internalize her aggressive behavior and match, right, those actions. And instead, you're just unaffected. You're able to sit outside of it and observe it from the outside, look at her and say, look at you, right? What's wrong with you? Why are you acting this way? Right? And you're not triggered at all. And it's that beautiful moment where you realize all of that hard work you put in, right, amounted to this moment where you are free, right?
Yeah,
you are
yes.
no longer under the control of somebody else's bad behavior.
That's right. And I will say in current times, this is the depth of my healing has become really obvious to me lately. So I lost my beloved husband of 42 years in March, and it was a very fast decline for him. And he's gone. So there's the grief, but there's also the person who used to do like the cable went out and I need a plumber, and his jobs are my jobs. And there's a lot of work related to when somebody goes. I mean, he had a comic book collection that has to be sold, and I'm going to move, and there's just a lot. And I am noticing I do get a little stressed sometimes, and I go, I like look at the money, chart a little more than is necessary. Mm-hmm. But I have not gone into a deep, compulsive, obsessive spiral, even though this is one of the hardest times in my life, even though I lost my major support person, the person closest to me. even though there's a lot of change and a lot more on my shoulders. And that really made evident to me, wow, this healing is really deep and it's real, because I'm sort of now in what I would consider more the center of the bell curve, you know what I mean? Not on the outer edge based on my anxiety and my obsessiveness. And so it's made it really obvious that he was part of my healing. Having that relationship was helpful. Having a support was helpful. But the healing is internal. It's really who I am now. And even in this, one of the most difficult situations we face, and a lot of women face at this point in their life, I am having what I consider sort of a more normal level of anxiety and stress, and not falling back into my old behaviors, which really reinforces to me that all that healing work has really brought me to a good place where I'm able to handle things like this so much better.
Yeah, I'm so sorry for your loss. It really is such a hard thing to lose your partner and your best friend.
Yes.
Yeah, it's so hard. And it's okay to have feelings about that.
Mm-hmm.
It's a sad thing, right? And saying, I think that's what you've learned, right? Is that you can think about your husband and you can think about your loss, and you can think about, what that means for you, and you can feel the sadness, and you can feel that pain, but you can sit with it and tolerate it without feeling like this is danger and I have to avoid this and I have to numb this and I have to do something to run and escape from this. What you learned from your brilliant therapist is, you know what? I can sit with and tolerate this feeling and handle this. I don't have to escape from it and run from it. And so it's being able to notice when you're being triggered, being able to sit with the difficult emotion, being able to tolerate distress is really what brings resilience, right? That's
Yes.
the healing journey, and that's the resilience. It's not just getting through it. It's really being able to sit with it and to be able to be healthy in it, even when you're experiencing it, right? To be sad, but okay at the same time, and allow it, right? Just allow it to happen, allow yourself to feel, allow it to pass without saying, I'm being triggered, I need to run.
Exactly. I mean, the healing isn't about the specifics. It's much broader than that, and applies much more broadly to all those sort of unanticipated things that will happen in life. Once you're in that place where you're healed to the point that you're not going to be triggered like that, it's not about the specific, it's not about that it's a customer service rep or that it's my mother or this specific scenario. It's about life in general, that challenges will arise unanticipated and even anticipated. Like, I knew this might happen. He was 10 years older, right? But knowing that and experiencing are different. But the healing is broad and deep. And so it applies to everything that will happen in the rest of your life. And that this situation has just was a reminder to me about that, about the depth of that healing, and that I don't have a partner now, but it will be harder and it is a massive loss, but I will be okay. I will get through this step by step.
You will, right? You've been through a lot, right? That's what you've taught your body and your mind, right? You fully know, right? Your body, every cell in your body knows where you've been, what you've been through, and the change, right? That you have allowed yourself to be able to really engulf, right? And so you are a newer, healthier version of yourself today.
Yes.
Than you were, back when you were a child and you didn't have the knowledge or the tools or the skills or the support that you needed. And so back then, avoidance and numbness and hypervigilance and all the things were your only way of coping. But today you've awarded yourself all of these other tools and strategies and knowledge that, bring you into this healthier place. And again, like you said earlier, it's normal to have emotions that sometimes are hard, right? Like, healing doesn't mean you're never going to be anxious. It doesn't mean you're never going to be sad or angry, right? These are normal human emotions. And so I don't want, any of our listeners to mistake that if you feel bad feelings ever, then that means you're doing it wrong or that you haven't healed, right? Those are normal feelings that you're always going to have. It's about being able to tolerate them without avoiding, right? It's about being able to work through it and sit through it and honor it and welcome it and say, okay, this is how I feel right now, and I'm going to let it pass.
That's right. I mean, the grief is deep. I have, grief bursts every day, as they call them. But I also know it won't always be this bad. right? I mean, it's not going to be this bad for the rest of my life. The loss will be real and part of me forever, but it won't always be this bad. I will work my way through it. And time does have a certain level of healing. And I've also reached out for help. I'm in a spousal loss support group and, doing the things that I need to do. So it's, life is long and a lot of challenges can happen, but it really is about that core idea for me about, yes, times will be hard. Sometimes things will be hard, but you will be able to manage it. You will be able to handle it in maybe not a perfect way, but a long-term way that's healthy and in your best interest.
Yeah. Yeah. Grief, I mean, as you know, I think isn't linear, right? There isn't just like this one path. People talk about the phases of grief, but they don't necessarily go in a particular order.
Yeah.
And time does help things to feel less hard, right? And so, but again, that doesn't mean that you won't at some point, hear a song that reminds you of him or something you experience, and you won't, feel sad in that moment or triggered in some sort of a way. And it isn't necessarily even always a bad trigger. Sometimes the feelings that come up when we're grieving are us really having a good memory or a loving memory or a thought that isn't necessarily bad or sad, but it's just overwhelming in emotion, and it comes over us, right? Because the person isn't there, but it feels good to have the memory. It feels good to see their face in our minds, or to hear their voice in our heads, or to remember something that was important to them, or to do something that honors them. And so, just keep allowing those experiences and be kind to yourself through your journey. It's not easy, but you've done so much hard work over the years on being able to sit with feelings that you will do this. You'll keep going and you'll be okay.
Yes, I will be okay. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. I like to say to my patients, sometimes I'll say something is scary and I'll say, I understand it is scary, so let's do it scared, right? Or that is sad, so let's do it sad, right? That's hard, so let's do it hard, right? Like, just because we're experiencing emotions that are difficult doesn't mean we should avoid. We do it anyway, and we experience those feelings. And like you said earlier, you can handle it, right? You have faith in yourself that you can handle that difficult emotion, and that emotion doesn't have to be so triggering and scary.
Yes, I can handle it. I'm not going to spiral, again, the way that I used to. I may have brief moments, but they won't last. And I will do the right thing for myself in the long run, make the right choices and find my new life, right? Build my new life.
Yeah. And I'm glad you're doing that. I'm glad you've given yourself the opportunity to do that. Not everybody, has the strength to say, this is really going to be hard work, but I'm going to do this hard work, and I'm going to heal, and I'm going to get better. Right. So I am really glad that you're doing that. This, I think, has been a really great, helpful conversation. I'm really excited to allow my listeners the opportunity to hear your story and learn from you. I think it's really helpful. Before we end for today, though, I do want to ask, is there anything that you felt was really important to share today that you didn't get to? And of course, I'd love for you to tell us where we can find you if we want to hear more about you.
I guess the one thought I have about to share is that I want to sort of emphasize that it wasn't like when I started my recovery journey, I actually thought I would be successful, or that, or that getting to this point that I am was even like an option on the table. I just encourage people to start whatever their ambivalence, whatever, their lack of trust or faith in the process, just give it a try and see where it leads, because that's how I did it. You don't have to know the outcome or be confident in a positive result to say, there's probably something here that it will at least improve me to a certain degree. And then you'll be surprised at how far you can go along that pathway. For reaching out to me, my book is on Amazon, From Junkie to Judge, One Woman's Triumph Over Trauma and Addiction. My opinion pieces and writings are on my website, junkie2judge.com. And my social media is exclusively about substance use, trauma, mental health, and recovery from all that. I will not even like something on a different topic. Even if I agree with it 100%, I stay very focused in my area. I post, articles and studies and my recovery thoughts on that. And I'm on X at Mary Beth O_, and I'm on Blue Sky, Mary Beth O'Connor, and I'm on LinkedIn. So if people can find me there.
Wonderful. I'm going to make sure I put all of this in the notes so that people can access it easily. I think that everything you have to share is really, really helpful. And I hope that this was helpful for our listeners today. Thank you again so much for being here, for your bravery and for your passion and sharing your story. It's not easy to tell everybody about, the the bad times, the dark times, the hard times. Some people really have a hard time with that. And so I think that sharing this really helps people to know that there's no reason ever to feel shame, right? That we're all human, that we're all walking these paths together. We all have hard days, and knowing that other people got through to the other side is sometimes that little inspiration that somebody needs to just take that next step that they need to take. So I hope that this reaches the people that it needs to reach, and it helps the people that need it. So thank you so much again for being here. Listeners, thank you so much for tuning in and hearing. Please, if this is a story that resonates for you or that could resonate for somebody else, please share it along with the people that it can help, because that's our whole purpose, right? Is reaching those who need us. So thank you, everyone, and I will see you next time.